Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Timoney coming to you from beautiful Denver, Colorado, or today in particular, blustery Denver, Colorado. And I kind of have two goals today for the presentation. One, of course, is to do live demos and walk the tightrope and hope something doesn't completely crash. That'll be the second half of the talk. But I wanted to start off talking about kind of how we express our skill sets and articulate what we do with Spatial SQL and PostGIS. Because despite being free software and despite this being a free kind of conference with speakers speaking for free, et cetera, there's value being created that's not being compensated for. So I want to touch upon how that is intertwined with the language we use to talk about what we do every day when we get into that SQL console. Okay. Kind of a disclaimer. And again, we have an international audience for this event. And I'm sure most of the international audience doesn't need to be told that people in the US speak from a distinctly US cultural vantage point. So my reflections on where Spatial SQL falls in the geospatial industry and how it is compensated is very US-centric and North America-centric. That being said, if it turns out that you are overcompensated for your PostGIS SQL skills, please let us know where you live in the chat and we'll get started on our immigration paperwork. And then the other disclaimer is I share the habit of my fellow country people of making points through exaggeration and figurative truths that might not be literally true. There's been a famous American or two who's used that communication pattern in the recent past. So if I say something like, window functions will help you earn $20,000 more a year, I don't know. Don't take that literally. It might be 30, it might be 10. Your mileage may vary. So again, our working assumption is that you sling SQL in the PostGIS environment and solve spatial problems using SQL versus other tools such as desktop GIS, Excel spreadsheets, et cetera. The other working assumption is, whether rightly or wrongly, you don't think you're adequately compensated considering what other people in other parts of IT make. Again, I feel you, I hear you. I'm here with empathy, but I'm here to also tell you some of it might be your fault. So let's get going. I guess we ought to go head on and face the elephant in the room. That is the only pun I'll be deploying today. My first presentation on PostGIS was in 2007. PostGIS is 22 years old, something like that. And we are now in 2023, and I think the discussion is worth having whether, for the sake of compensation and articulating your value in the marketplace, whether appending the GIS acronym to the end of your skill set is a financially savvy thing to do. GIS, again, in the US context, tends to be underpaid, considering other parts of the IT industry that in some cases demand a more limited set of skills. And then also we have decades of GIS, quote marks, air quotes, being held as strictly in the desktop GUI paradigm, which of course we as Spatial SQL adepts, we have a certain amount of derision for the reliance on desktop GUIs. However, our advanced skills might not be getting compensated for. The other end of the equation of the PostGIS name and why it might not be optimized for your income stream is the role of Postgres. And again, coming at it from 15, 20 years ago, if GIS was obscure, Postgres SQL was even more obscure. At best, people, if they had heard about an open source database, it was probably MySQL. And here we are, 2023, and Postgres has a certain sexiness to it. And it's well known and has it resonates in all sorts of sectors of the tech world. So the idea of, hey, if I put PostGIS then on my resume or CV, then I'm good. Friends, if you think people, especially the people who determine your income, can make the conceptual abstract leap from PostGIS as an extension to Postgres, that is erroneous. You need to spell that out, that you are Postgres and Postgres SQL proficient, and that will have an immediate impact on your earning potential. I went to Phosphor-GNA a couple weeks ago, and I ran into some folks who also sling a lot of spatial SQL. And I'm like, hey, you know, we're in public. Never say the word st_make polygon to me. If you start a sentence with st_ in front of civilians, I hate to say it, you deserve the low pay that you get. Do not chat about insider spatial SQL minutia to civilians. They don't want to hear it. You think you're impressing your boss because of your embrace of complexity of spatial function names? Your boss is bored, and bored people aren't reaching for their wallet. Early in the year, I came across this announcement. AWS has a SageMaker geospatial offering that you can pay for to do all sorts of spatial things with both raster and vector. And I came across this term, vector enrichment. And apparently it refers to both reverse geocoding as well as spatial joins. And I'm like, AWS has a lot of MBAs with really expensive haircuts who spend a lot of time thinking about what is the exact wording that will help me extract the maximum amount of money out of our customer pockets. And again, I'm not an expensive haircut guy, but if somebody's saying, hey, if you just call spatial joins vector enrichment, you'll do a little better in the paycheck department. I'm all for it. So let's piggyback on what well-known companies are calling things we do every day. This one is for all of you who have a certain amount of intellectual reservations about the Uber H3 indexing system that uses hexagons. You, the spatial adept, might be using st_hexagon grid. And I can only say that because we're insiders here, right? This will never get out to the civilian world. But here's the thing. If I call my hexagons in front of my managers and bosses Uber H3 hexagons, guess what? They recognize Uber. Hey, multi-billion-dollar startup. You're associating high-value entities like AWS and Uber with your very prosaic spatial function analytic needs. See what we're doing here? We're just creating a bridge. Even if you never touch H3 hexagons, just tell your boss you're using Uber hexagons and move on. Another thing, a lot of us are in kind of organizational structures where we are dealing with the ingestion of data and some analysis, and then we pass the data on to people who build dashboards, often in Power BI and Tableau. And there's all sorts of rhetoric around, oh, you can shape your data in Tableau or slice your data in Power BI. It's like, bro, just step away from your little DAX expression because I'm bringing the SQL. And if you learned nothing else from the presentation today, you need to embrace window functions. Window functions are how you, the PostGIS SQL analyst, slice and dice and categorize and rank data and give it so you can pass it on analysis ready. Window functions will add value to your resume tomorrow. My geospatial consulting colleague, Bill Dollins, had a blog post about window functions in PostGIS just last week that I encourage you to check out. And I fully agreed in the chat, in the comments section. And then I discovered DataCamp. DataCamp has a course that's just about window functions. And look at their language. Don't take my word for it. The SQL secret weapon. Come on, man. DataCamp is all about the pub, all about the froth. Get on board with window functions. And Regina, I believe, put in the comments to Bill's post, like PostGIS has window functions too. And I direct your attention to the middle of the screen, st_cluster k-means. The k-means technique, where have I heard that? Could it be from machine learning? Think of it, friends. If you just figure out how to use st_cluster k-means, you could put machine learning on your CV. Isn't that awesome? And then the bucks will start rolling in. So again, take all your knowledge that you hold in kind of the obscure grasp of your private hands and promulgate that to a much bigger audience using language they understand. Folks, some of you are here because last year I talked about hockey data, specifically NHL API data. And the bigger piece of that conversation was so many of our data interactions these days are happening via APIs. And I've been getting reports from the field that APIs are even being spoken of like by the civilians and people who didn't know how to spell API 3 years ago now understand, oh, it's like a data feed. It's like a stream of data, et cetera, et cetera. For our purposes, it's in JSON. And what my presentation last year focused on was we can import JSON into our PostGIS database. We can parse JSON data. And like, so if your boss is like, well, we need to start accessing third-party sources of API data, so I guess we're going to need somebody who knows Python, to parse all that data. You just say, hey, cowboy, I can parse the JSON coming in with SQL. So how about you take all that money that you were going to pay Python person and shove it my way, because I can sling JSON all day. And we're going to have an example in just a few minutes of not only can we ingest and parse JSON and use it the way we use other more familiar forms of tabular data and spatial data within PostGIS, folks, we can even push it out of the database as JSON and GeoJSON. So we got it both directions. So that concludes the rant portion of the presentation today. But we need to ask ourselves, friends, a lot of us got into data-centric roles because, frankly, we prefer the company of data to the company of human beings. So maybe, just maybe, if we want more recognition, if we want more compensation, maybe it's incumbent on us to reach out to people, reach out to not so technical people, and assess how we can accommodate their needs, accommodate their wants when it comes to data. And so 2 things I want to focus on today in my demo are foreign data wrappers and PG feature serve. And with that, we will shut down the old slides and we'll see what live demos we can conjure up. Okay, that's done. All right. So on your screen, this is the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, which got renamed apparently. Anyway, they have a bunch of data sets, download data sets, blah, blah, blah. Oh, look here, GIS data. And this middle one right here. So it's like well permits and it's updated daily. So we have a well permits file. And if we just mouse over it, and I'll read the small writing for it, basically it's a zipped shape file sitting on their server. Now, let's say our boss came to us and said, hey, you know that well permits shapefile that's updated every day? How about giving me a spreadsheet? And I need it by county. And you're like, yeah, whatever. And then you're thinking about it and you're like, this is kind of a pain in the neck. I have the Zoom bar interrupting my thing here. And you're like, how can we do this? And folks, I want to introduce you to foreign data wrappers, because my solution, you know, the underpaid GIS analyst solution is I'm going to download this every morning before I have my coffee, and then I'm going to unzip it into a folder and replace yesterday's file, and then I'm going to fire up my desktop GIS, and then I'll load the shape file, and then I'll export it into something that the boss can look at as a spreadsheet. It's like, get rid of that mentality right now, friends. Because what we need to do, look, this is a foreign data wrapper. Most of you have not even, it already, I mean, foreign, it already sounds foreign. It sounds hard. Look what we have to do, friends. That's 5 lines of stuff to create that reference inside my PostGIS database, right? And looky here, this VSI zip, VSI curl, that does go, that gets it over the internet to grab the file. VSI zip unzips the file, friends. Friends, just getting the unzipping of shape files out of my life is more than worth these 5 lines of code. And then the second step, import foreign schema. Friends, you're not even looking inside to see what kind of fields they have. Just import the schema. I just bring it in and we'll figure it out. And then we're ready to go. We got permits as a foreign table, which there we go, right on the side there. So we got permits, but I know what you're saying. The boss wants county names and there's no counties listed in the file. Friends, we're PostGIS adepts. You know what we do? We create a view, and then we have a spatial join on Colorado counties, right? But we don't call it spatial join anymore. Remember, it's vector enrichment. We're vector enriching the permits with the county name. Boom. And I'm going to put it in a function. And this is where the magic happens, friends, because now we have PG feature serve, which is a super lightweight way of serving up that data back to the user. So this is the default interface to PG feature serve. And you're like, well, that's kind of a little bit interesting. And here are our permits. Our permits are spatially enriched in our functions right here. And you're like, okay, where's my function? Here we go. And there's the JSON. Here's some JSON. And you're like, is that cool? I don't know if it's cool. Is it cool yet? And you're like, that's the data, but it's definitely not cool. Friends, again, we speak API JSON data, we can work with it and push it somewhere else. So where do the people who can pay us more money live? Friends, they live in spreadsheets. So let's go to a Google Sheet, go here. Here's this table just crying out for our JSON that's inside that we can push out using PG Feature Serve. And again, the whole point of PG Feature Serve is all your data is just a URL away. Friends, look at that. It's even sorted by date. And again, we're taking all that ugly JSON data and putting it in a spreadsheet that our bosses can manipulate and work with. And you're like, Brian, how hard was it to like take that ugly JSON data and put it in a Google Sheet? Friends, it was like an 8-minute video on YouTube. All this like Google spreadsheet app script stuff, it's all over YouTube. It's all over Stack Overflow. It's the least of your problems. This little PostGIS day menu item, that was like a 5-minute video. Friends, you're not talking to somebody who enjoys diving into JavaScript, because I checked out of the JavaScript world at the time of jQuery's peak, right? So you're like, okay, that's kind of cool. I have some data that I'm spatially enriching in PostGIS, and my boss doesn't want a map. She just wants a spreadsheet. Here's your spreadsheet. And I'm done unzipping shapefiles. That alone is a huge boon to my life and well-being. All right, so you're like, that's kind of cool. Let's make things a wee bit more dynamic. So I had all that hockey data from the 2021-2022 season. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to give a talk for free to PostGIS Day, that data still works for me. How about we make our point PG Feature Serve at our table of goals? So over 700 players scored a goal in the 2021-2022 season. So let's just do a little, go find a team, the Buffalo Sabres. And then we're using PG Feature Serve. We populate the dropdown. We go to Victor Olofsson. I don't know anything about that guy. And then it pulls back some data from the database, puts it in our spreadsheet. And you're like, that's kind of cool. Now, I know there's some people in the audience here who are coming from non-spatial databases. And I can already hear you over the internet. You're saying, I got a Lambda on AWS with a Python script, and I could do that, pulling tabular data out of DynamoDB and pushing it to a spreadsheet, blah, 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 blah. Great, good for you. Now it's time for you to sit up and go to school. Because folks, we're not satisfied with just tabular data. We have other things up our sleeve. Oh, what happened? Oh, in the chart column, I have a chart of the locations of all those 20 goals of Victor Olofsson served up dynamically by PG Feature Serve. Now I have some audience participation requirements. Somebody in the chat tell me, forget that. I'm not going to be able to read your chat while I'm giving a presentation. And you're like, oh, he cooked that SVG. No, let's go to Boston Bruins, right? Go down, Taylor Hall. I have no idea who Taylor Hall is, right? And again, we'll get our shot chart, and boom, there it is. Served up dynamically right now into as an SVG document that the Google spreadsheet is just ingesting as an image and displaying inside the cell. Yeah, your DynamoDB ain't doing that. You got right? And then we have a link to a larger chart that, look at these beautiful vectors, SVG vectors with a little title. And you're like, Brian, what, this is voodoo magic. It's like, it's not voodoo magic. It's actually pretty simple SVG, because the next speaker today, Martin Davis, he created all this SVG magic in the background. And look, friends, I'm just doing a basic spatial queries, intersections, getting my player info, nothing big. And look at the styling requirements for SVG. Nothing crazy, outrageous. And that's it. That's the document. If you saw my presentation last year, I'm telling you, these SVG documents are a heck of a lot easier to generate than the raster equivalents. Let's just do one more, since our friends at Paul Ramsey's in British Columbia. Let's find somebody from Vancouver. I got 700 players in the NHL. I can bring up 700 shot charts, but you didn't give me enough time to talk. Let's go Connor Garland. Right there. Finally, let's generate the shot chart. Boom. So friends, this is meeting people where they live in terms of usability. The people who can unlock the wealth to pay you what you're worth for your analytical skills, for your tech chops, for your ability to convey information, both tabular information as well as spatial information, and give it to people who A, have money, and B, they know how to drop down inside a spreadsheet works. This is the path to your future happiness. And while they gaze on your work with slack-jawed amazement because you stuffed an SVG diagram inside a Google Sheet cell, while they're silent with slack-jawed amazement, you break that silence, friend, with 2 words and 2 words only. Pay me. Thank you very much.
Lovely stuff. So, is everyone going to pay you? Yes, we'll pay you. I was interested to see you using a Google Sheet instead of an Excel spreadsheet. I was wondering, are you, is this architecture where like Excel is the front end and the back end is invisible, as it should be to the end user? But the
Yeah,
front
so
end
it's
is like
Google
totally,
Sheets. And
yeah.
this is all just URLs from FeatureServe.
Yeah. So is this something you're
There's
actually,
nothing complicated. It's just a URL.
so I understand your business as being slinging of Excel spreadsheets. Is this like an architecture you've used in anger?
Well, it's funny because I haven't exposed myself to the app scripts world since they started a few years ago. App scripts and with Google Docs, Google Sheets. I mean, it's crazy. Everyone's slinging code. It's crazy. And the idea is I can easily share this, right? So this is like the web first, web friendly, approach versus Excel.
Is
And again,
Excel not like more of a web citizen now? Does not have like functions that will reach
I
out
didn't want to
to
go down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
I went down the SVG and the Google App Scripts rabbit holes for today's presentation.
Oh, appreciate it.
And that was plenty for me, right? Because if you give me an Excel spreadsheet and a customization task, bro, I'm going to write VBA until my heart breaks.
Yeah. I mean, everything's connected now. So yeah, the spreadsheet is the universal front end for
Right.
sure.
And shout out, I am using the database online is Crunchy Bridge. So batteries were included. So I didn't have to figure out how PG FeatureServe actually would get installed, blah, blah, blah. But big shout out to Martin, because SVG is not a documented feature of being displayed in Google Sheets as one of the supported image types. But I saw it kind of worked with just, prosaic SVG files. And then we had a 5-minute hallway conversation at FOSS4G where I explained the use case that I'm showing you today. And he's like, yeah, we can make that work, because SVG can also be served up by FeatureServe. And you know, he gave, you can construct the URL in a certain way that the SVG MIME type
Instead.
goes with your content. And that's how external applications know, hey, this is an SVG file.
Very nice indeed. Any questions on the chat? I do love that picture. That's shockingly nice.
And again, SVG, you're not gonna like, you're not gonna push out like, you know, a parcel map of you know, a large county. Is that'll be a huge payload because it's fundamentally a plain text format. But for like lightweight displays, it's actually a really good way to go. And of course here, the big thing is here, you can just, you know, load, you know, a few players and then you do the visual comparison right here, right? That's the power of like, okay, I can spend 30 seconds and see different patterns.
Yeah, there it is. Your BI dashboard.
Exactly. No Tableau server, no Power BI server, no Arc server for enterprise, just my database and PG feature serve, making the happiness happen.
Thank you again, Brian.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, audience.